Welcome to another edition of the Dean Legge Show here. It's the Thursday before Georgia and Tennessee meet. This is usually one of the bigger games on the schedule for the Dawgs. This edition seems like Tennessee's just another team in the way of Georgia on the way to, at this point, Jacksonville and Auburn, and perhaps the SEC championship game and beyond. We'll see. This game opened with Georgia being favored by 22 points, which is huge. And it has moved up to, wiggling between 24.5 and 25. That's the largest line for any team besides last year's Alabama team to be favored in Knoxville. Now, Neyland Stadium is a very difficult place to play. I've talked about that a lot this week. I'm not sure you can really totally understand it unless you're on the ground, on the field, because of the ambient noise that comes from the speaker system that's at Neyland, as well as just 100,000 people, which is a legitimately huge amount of people at any stadium. There's not that many stadiums like that. Now there's a couple in the SEC. If you think Georgia's loud, you should go to Neyland. Neyland is extremely loud and tough to play in. This will be Georgia's first true road game since playing, I'm trying to even think, probably at Kentucky last year. Is that about right? With Tech, that was 50-50. Vanderbilt was 50-50. The bowl game, the SEC championship, those were both evenly split, or Georgia had maybe a few more people. So this will be a challenge for the Georgia offense. How many Tennessee people show up is a good question, because Neyland Stadium with 30,000 Georgia fans, or 25 or 20,000 Georgia fans, and only 70,000 Tennessee or 60,000 Tennessee fans, that's not going to be the same Neyland that I've grown accustomed to covering Georgia at. By the way, I've covered Georgia at Neyland since 2003. I was not there in 2001. So I've seen Neyland over the years. That's 15 or 16 years. Probably, 8 times. This will be the 8th time or so that I've been to Neyland covering a game. Georgia's more than held their own at Neyland in that time, but it doesn't make it any less difficult to play there. The loudest pop of noise that I've ever heard at Neyland was when DJ Shockley threw what was almost a pick six and wound up being a Tennessee score a play later in 2005. But Georgia came back, and after they were still winning, but they after that play kept doing what they wanted to do in that game and eventually won it on the way to the SEC championship. The Dawgs have never won the Southeastern Conference East Division without first beating Tennessee. So the game is huge. Georgia's a massive favorite. Tennessee really doesn't have what is needed to be in Georgia's stratosphere right now. But I'll say this, in all the time that Nick Saban has been at Alabama, and that's the same basic thing that Georgia's got. You want to at me, that's fine. But right now we're year 3 here of something similar to what Alabama's has had well over a decade. I only say that to say this. In that time that Nick Saban's been the coach at Alabama, there's only been 2 games that have been single-digit wins for the Tide. The bulk of the games have been 30-point or more victories. And I expect this to be a lopsided Georgia win. But, you have to go play the game. The money line for this game, if you put $100 down, you're going to get paid, you're going to have to put down $2,500. You have to risk $2,500 to get $100 back for betting on Georgia. Let's listen to Kirby talk about playing in Neyland. It's a place he knows well from his time playing twice there in his 4 years at Georgia, and all his time at Alabama, and including the 2005 Georgia game. That was his first coaching appearance, I believe, at Neyland Stadium.
All right, well, we'll start off with Tennessee. We worked on Tennessee a little bit last week, as well as some of our future opponents, but primarily on Tennessee on Thursday. I think Jeremy's doing a great job with the situation he's in. I certainly know this. They play hard. They play physical. You can turn the tape on in the 3rd and 4th quarter and watch how their kids compete, and they play the game the right way.
I would need to go back and be certain. Kirby was on the staff as a not as a full-blown assistant coach at LSU in 2003, but you get the point. Kirby talking about the Vols and what Jeremy Pruitt has been doing up there. It's kind of been a rough week for the Vols, needless to say. They're coming off a bye week, losing to the Gators without even scoring a touchdown, a lopsided, ugly football game. That game was just not good on either side. Florida's undefeated, but they have a major challenge this week in Auburn. We'll talk about the Gators tomorrow in the pregame show. But for Jeremy, he really thinks this is a good Georgia team. And I don't think he's just blowing smoke. I think he's got a point. He says this is as good as he's seen Georgia this early. Let's listen to what Jeremy Pruitt had to say earlier this week about the Georgia Bulldogs.
When you look at Georgia, it's probably the best Georgia team that I can ever remember at this point in time in the season. Very complete on both sides of the ball in the kicking game. You start offensively, it starts with Jake Fromm. To me, he does as good a job as anybody in the country and maybe as anybody as I've ever coached against as far as keeping their offense in positive situations. He takes care of the football, gets the ball out of his hand.
A couple of more interesting things about this Tennessee-Georgia thing since Kirby's gotten to Athens. Obviously, 2-1 against the Vols, that miracle play by Jacob Eason and then by Josh Dobbs. More of a miracle by Josh Dobbs, I would argue. But since then, Georgia's really outplayed Tennessee dramatically. And one interesting thing, the last time Georgia was in Knoxville, Jake Fromm scored 2 rushing touchdowns. He only has 3 career rushing touchdowns, so he did the most with his legs that day that he really has in all of his time at Georgia. He looked extremely athletic. He's I think he's more athletic than maybe people give him credit for. But Jake, with 2 big touchdowns and a 41-0 win, one of the most lopsided wins in the series with Georgia and Tennessee. The other thing, and this is important, is that the Vols have not yet gained more than 210 yards against Georgia these last two games. I say not yet. Obviously, the games have concluded, but I don't know if they'll get more than 210 this week at all. They did upgrade with getting Jim Chaney to be the offensive coordinator up there. I don't think there's any question they upgraded what they had, but they are in serious trouble in terms of they're just not scoring points. The quarterback situation appears to be teetering towards a mess, if not a mess, right now for the Vols. You had the arrest phone call come out this week from one of Jeremy Pruitt's players at Tennessee, and Pruitt was questioning whether the police had to arrest a player who had a warrant out for his arrest, which is kind of hard to, as a person who's dealt in that world a little bit, it's kind of hard to believe that you wouldn't know that a warrant means you are going to get arrested. I mean, it's a warrant for an arrest. So that was not a good look. And then you have Georgia coming in this week. So a challenging week for the Vols, to be sure. One other thing that they'll have to deal with is the emergence of Tae Crowder at Georgia. He's become a player that flashes a lot for the Dawgs. And you're seeing this more and more in Georgia's programs. Guys like Jawan Taylor last year, now Tae Crowder, guys who weren't overly, were not heavily recruited at their particular position. I mean, Tae Crowder came in as a running back athlete, and now you're seeing him run all over the field. He has become a major contributor for Georgia. I think it shows to me, in my view, that he is a program guy. What I mean by that is not that he's buying in exclusively. That's not one thing he's done. But the program has, because he's bought in, allowed him to shine. And players like that, when Nakobe Dean, who is really good, is a backup linebacker, that tells you what this program is doing. You see guys like Justin Young, who, if you'd given up on Justin Young, I don't think anybody would hate you for it. But he's in there on huge plays for Georgia last week against Notre Dame, nearly picking off what was close to a sideways, it was close to a lateral 2 weeks ago against Notre Dame and past the off week for the Dogs. Justin Young was in there. So you're seeing there's no waste at Georgia. There's no fat on the bone. They are using every part of the body that they can. They've got 85 guys. They're not 85 on scholarship who signed day of, but I can assure you they're using every single thing that they can. One of the people that they're using a lot is Tae Crowder. Here's what Kirby had to say about Tae Crowder.
Tae is taking ownership in his job, and he's become much better at being able to adapt and change to what happens within a game, within a play. Something checks, something changes. So many formations you get from offenses nowadays, and so much complicated scheme stuff that he's able to help get us right, besides Monty being the only guy that can do that. So he has grown at that. I think the fact that he's gotten better at that, it allows him to make some plays. But to all those questions about, I don't know. I don't think he would be concerned with all those things right now. He's trying to play his best football for his teammates so that we can be successful on defense.
So a huge game. It's hard to say. It really is hard. Y'all know I'm straight to the point. It's hard for me to say that when Georgia's a 24-point favorite over a team. I mean, they weren't that big a favorite at Vanderbilt, I don't think, and I had no confusion who was going to win that game. I don't know how long it's going to take for Tennessee to get their act together. I talked with someone up there who's a little bit tied in to the Tennessee situation, and their point was if you fire him, that's the 12th coach in 6 years or something like that. I mean, or the 6th coach in 12 years, excuse me. The merry-go-round has got to stop. I'm not sure if Jeremy Pruitt is the answer. Actually, I don't think he is necessarily. But that's not going to help them on Saturday. They've got what they've got, and Tennessee will have to figure out how to upset Georgia. I don't buy it. I don't think you do either. Dean Legge's show for Thursday night on Dog Post, DAWGPOST.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you over on the website.